while we're waiting for him, I'll just kind of start and kind of give a lead in. I know there's been a lot of questions that have come up recently, especially with the tax law changes when it happened for it. So one of the first points to just be aware of is if you have a home equity loan or home equity line of credit, that starting in 2018, that interest is no longer deductible as a tax deduction.
That's a pretty expensive.
So if you have a home equity line of credit, and let's say you've got $10,000 on the line of credit for that for it, and before we were able to take the interest off of that line of credit, no longer is it available to be a tax deductible item. Yes, sir.
FHA loans, does that affect anything? FHA loans?
Is a primary loan?
Primary loans?
No, the primary loans aren't really affected. Primary loans basically are affected if the mortgage is over $500,000, and therefore, so anything above $500,000, they are not allowing any interest deductions. And therefore, so if you have $1 million loan or that for it, above between, let's say, the interest on the $500 to $1 million loan, you're not going to be able to deduct that interest from your taxes. Right. There was also, well, you see, the big news, the comment was that's for rich people. The problem was that there were basically 4 states that were really fighting it: California, New York, Connecticut, right, the Northeast, Boston, or Massachusetts, because I don't know if you ever watched Flip or Flop or any of those HGAT. They show like a $500,000 house out in California, and I go, that's my basement's bigger than that house, right? And it's a $500,000 house or whatever, right? So they were fighting it because they wanted to be able to take the deduction. But they made that change for it. The other part was had to do with property taxes, and therefore so they capped the property tax portion at $10,000 is a deductible portion. So there were some questions. You probably saw the lines or on TV. All the people headed down to either Cook County or DuPage or Lake or that for it to prepay taxes for 2018 taxes, paying them in 2017. The reason for that was if they paid them in 2017, they would still potentially be able to take the deduction. It's not been confirmed whether that will be allowed or not. There are some legal IRS rulings in that for it. I'm not specific on what they are, but the IRS may or may not potentially allow those deductions to be on a 2017 tax return. So essentially, if your property taxes were, let's say, $20,000, just taking that as a number for it, you basically got $40,000 worth of deductions if you paid, assuming you paid them all, and therefore you got a $40,000 worth of deduction in 2017, right? So there are some reasons why they potentially could not allow that. If you think about it in these terms for it, if they allow that, that means that a lot of people's gross tax or net income areas would be reduced by a sizable amount of money, which could potentially affect the federal government's revenue going forward, right, for 2017. They could potentially get less because there's X number of dollars of deductions that aren't going to be taxed because of the income for it. So that's one. I had some clients ask me if I thought it was a good deal to pay it early. My basic idea said to look at it and see how big the difference would be. So if your taxes were, $18,000, it could make sense because you were able to take the full $18,000 as long as you had the capital to pay it all for it. And therefore, could make sense to do it. But if it was like $10,500, well, for the additional $500, I'm not sure if that was really going to make that much of a difference with regard to it, right? Because then you would also lose that deduction in 2018. So you kind of double up on it in 2017, but then for 2018 you wouldn't have any deductions essentially for property taxes because you would have prepaid it early, right? Which could potentially help you on your 2017 taxes, but might not help you on your 2018 taxes, right? So it's just something that you know, there are a lot of nuances that are still coming out with regard to the tax return, with the tax program in there for it. One of the big things has to do with individual tax rates have gone down for the most part in that for it. And then you've seen the big drop in corporate tax rates. So the corporate tax rate used to be 35%. Now it's gone down to 21%. And therefore, you've already seen some large corporations, due to the tax savings, go ahead and be able to kind of give those bonuses out. So I think with AT&T was going to give $1,000 bonuses out to certain people, and then Comcast did the same, and then I think Verizon was looking to do the same. So some larger companies were doing that. Some other companies said that they were going to increase their wages compliance for employees and that for it. So if they were hourly basis, some of them were going to be raising their hourly rates. All due to the tax savings that they were getting. There was a number of articles last week between the holidays and that that basically just talked about how analysts and that were going back in to rerun numbers and take a look at everything, because they don't know how this whole program is going to impact where they're at. Right, because they don't have a finalized portion, because it's still so new and everybody's trying to get a handle on it. So you're going to see more and more come out about it. What I think you'll probably see as corporations come out and talk about their earnings and that sort of, what I think you'll probably see until we can get a full picture on it is that they'll come back and revise earnings going forward, right? So they'll come out and say, maybe they'll say their earnings initially are going to be up $1. Pick that number for it, right? They might come back in the second quarter and say, well, now that we've had really a chance to digest the whole tax law change and that for it, it's actually going to be $2, right? So they could come back and potentially take a look at that for it. I think it's just going to be something that's an ongoing portion. The other big portion that came in was a repatriation of assets that came in, right? So they're allowing corporations to bring those monies back and not have significant tax implications with regard to them, which means that companies have more capital in that to come back and spend or potentially invest in the U.S. Lower tax rates. Back in the 80s, when Reagan lowered tax rates and that for it in the U.S., what you saw happen around the world is everybody else started to lower tax rates and that for it. So it wouldn't surprise me if other countries start to follow the lead, so to speak. Right now, if I understand it correctly, of the G8, the countries in the G8, the U.S. now has the lowest corporate tax rate among those economies in that for it. I know that for a period of time that you had a lot of French companies that were basically going across the channel and incorporating into England, because England actually had a lower tax rate than they did in France and that for it. So you were seeing companies happen. So you could potentially see more companies. There was a company, I forget who it was it Broadcom? I thought it was. They were going to bring back a whole series of jobs and everything back to the U.S. from where they were at. So you're going to see potentially, it's going to be something that's, I think, going to be more graduated. Think of it more as like kind of starting a new job. You walk into a new job, first thing is you're trying to figure out where the bathroom's at, and where the desk is, and those kind of things, right? So it's going to take some time, I think, for things to start to kick in. There have also been some discussion to have an infrastructure bill. If they do an infrastructure bill for it, in my opinion, you could see potentially a 20-year Reagan run, because the infrastructure, you got lower taxes, you have some other things going on with it. So it does give us some opportunity to really take advantage of some things that are out there for us. So, yes?
Two questions. You can answer one earlier. The first one is, with the student loan interest, that's still deductible in 2018, and then what's the charitable contribution? Is that any effect on that?
So the questions were, A, with regard to student loans, is the interest still going to be deductible? And the second was with regard to charitable. With regard to the student loans, I don't believe there were any changes with regard to that, so the tax deductibility of the interest with regard to that should still be intact. With regard to the charitable loan portion, are you referring to being able to direct from an IRA to a charity?
Well, let's say contribution goes next to the church.
Right. So yeah. So the tithes or that for it. as far as I'm aware at this point in time, they have not affected charitable contributions, okay? So you still, it will be basically just as what it was. That was one of the concerns that charities did have, that there could potentially have. Yes?
You said that 2018 property tax will not be deducted.
No, what I said is if your property taxes are over $10,000.
Okay, over 10,000.
Over $10,000. So if your property taxes are $7,000, it's not gonna affect you one way or the other. If your property taxes are $20,000, you'll only be able to deduct 10,000 of the 20,000, starting in 2018.
That affects interest rates too?
No, it doesn't affect the interest rates. Interest rates would be kind of maybe driven by the Fed or the bank for that, for it. So that will be a whole separate kind of situation.
So for retired individuals, how does this tax
There's potentially lower tax rates that you could be paying depending on what your income level is and that for it. It could be, they maintain the dividend tax and that for it, so the tax rates on those. So there could be a number of ways for retirees, it may not have as much of a significant impact in that for it as it will for the rest of the individuals. Other than potentially where your income tax rate was last year, could potentially be lower this year in 2018 because they changed where the tax record is. Okay? So